What's going on? We can't get through the door.
Strange as he is, that pale fellow's magic works. Good for rooting out the rats.
Hello everyone and welcome to PlayStation Access. My name is Rosie and I am joined by the lovely Rob.
Hello Rosie, thank you for calling me lovely.
You're very welcome as always, Rob. And I'm very excited to hear your tales because you've been playing Metaphor ReFantazio, which is a game I previewed earlier in the year. I played the first 2 hours, but you've been playing the whole game.
Yes,
So
well I haven't played the whole game yet, Rosie, but I've been playing a lot of it. As with all games from Atlus, so this is the new game from the team that originally brought us the Persona series, and if you've played Persona, you will know these games are hundreds of hours long. There's a lot to get through. There's a lot to dive into with this game. I think it's one of the most unique JRPGs I've ever played.
So, what would you say to an alliance?
If you've played a Persona game before and you know the structure of Persona, you'll know that they're not your typical JRPG, and if you've played Persona, you will be very familiar with some of the mechanics present in Metaphor ReFantazio. But I'm just gonna take you through why I think it's the most unique JRPG I've ever played, Rosie.
I'm excited.
It's incredibly cool. I mean, I'm gonna set myself a challenge. I've got to get through this video without using the word stylish.
Starting with cool, we've got one word down.
So I've got to try and find any word that isn't the word stylish. The only time I'm permitting myself to say that word is now, when I say that I won't be saying it again in this video. So I will say, if you've played Persona, you'll be familiar with many of the mechanics in Metaphor ReFantazio. So like in Persona, where you have your personas, so like fantastical beings you can transform into in combat, essentially, like an inner manifestation of characters' psyches that imbue them with supernatural magical powers. In Metaphor, they're called archetypes, but in much the same way as in Persona, your characters go through these quite dramatic transformations, typically with a really cool anime cutscene when their archetype first awakens, or when they first get their power. So previously in Persona 5, for instance, you were telling me earlier today, Rosie, where you sort of like rip a bit of their face off.
Yeah, like the mask appears on their face and their eyes have got blood all over them.
So in Metaphor, the characters will rip out their hearts. And they are imbued with the power of the archetype. And this is like, essentially, they're like what you would call jobs traditionally, like in a Final Fantasy game. Each archetype has its own set of strengths and weaknesses. So early on, for example, 3 very basic archetypes are the Seeker, which is sort of like a support character, bit of wind magic. You've got the Mage, which weak physically but has access to a bunch of elemental spells, fire, lightning, ice, etc., that exploit enemy weaknesses. And you've got the Warrior, who's not so great on magic but is the guy you want on the front line dealing heavy melee damage. And these archetypes, you can freely swap between them, and the game sort of encourages you to do so. So if you're picking up Metaphor, I would encourage you not to get bogged down in thinking, oh well, this is my protagonist. You can call the protagonist whatever you like. Mine's called Roberus because I always call my protagonist Roberus. So initially I was like, well, Roberus is the Seeker, like he has to be the Seeker. I'm not going to change Roberus. And I quickly learned, actually no, it doesn't matter. Roberus can be whatever the situation requires of him.
Anyone can be the Seeker.
So anyone can. Once you can, there's like a price you pay.
Right.
I think the currency is called Magla, and I think typically with some of the simpler archetypes, you will pay 500 Magla, and a character can study that archetype, which means they can then equip that archetype. So any character can equip any archetype. And so it's basically up to you how you want to kit out your party. But interestingly, within each sort of dungeon, the game gives you an option to view what other people have used in terms of their setup to complete that dungeon. So you get a really good sense of, okay, what level should I be to complete this dungeon, and what are the archetypes that people have been using to get through this dungeon. It might be you come up against a boss or a particular type of enemy that uses a particular type of attack, and it's kicking your ass, but usually there'll always be an archetype that is strong against that. So archetypes have like built-in resistances as well. So certain archetypes can be resistant to fire or ice magic, for example. So if you're in an area or fighting a boss that uses a particular style of magic, you want to swap to that archetype that is strong against it. So basically, don't get bogged down in thinking certain characters have to be certain archetypes. Swap between them, and you get this really sort of pleasing strategical element where you sort of get to know what archetypes are good against what types of enemy, and swapping between archetypes becomes sort of second nature. And of course, the more you equip certain archetypes, they'll rank up, they'll unlock more skills, etc., etc. So very much like the Personas in the Persona series, archetypes.
I feel stronger.
There's also the whole time management thing. So quite uniquely to the Persona series, there's this whole sort of like calendar going on, and certain narrative events happen at certain dates in the calendar, and you have to make sure that you are ready for those dates and manage your time effectively. So that might mean dipping into a dungeon to do a bit of leveling up. It might mean hanging out with some of your friends, because there's also the whole social bonds thing that is in Metaphor as well. So again, much like Persona, you have party members, and a lot of the game is spending time with them and hanging out with them and increasing those social bonds. And as those social bonds increase, that then feeds into the abilities that can be unlocked in the archetypes, and it increases the strength of the archetypes. So all of these systems are always, in a very satisfying way, speaking to each other, informing each other, and you get a game that is on one side just about the characters and the character development. And one of the things I always loved about Persona was how much I enjoyed just hanging out with my party. That became like the game for me, as much as the actual turn-based fighting bit, which I always think it sounds weird whenever you try and explain Persona, or in this case Metaphor, to someone who's never played it before. And you're like, oh yeah, you just sort of like, you go to bed and you hang out with your friends, and you have to decide, what am I going to do in the morning? What am I going to do in the afternoon? And when you explain it to someone, they're like, well, what? Why is that a game? But there's something incredibly satisfying about successfully managing that time and balancing all of these different systems and getting through dungeons successfully. Like, it makes you feel smart and cool. So there's that. And as I said, all of these different mechanics ultimately feed into, I guess, what you could call the main core of the game, which is the turn-based battle system. And again, if you've played a Persona game, you'll be very sort of familiar with the way the battles pan out in Metaphor. So they are turn-based. If you manage to exploit an enemy's weakness, you will get like additional turns. You can see like a turn counter at the top of the screen. If you manage to exploit an enemy weakness or stun an enemy, you will extend your turn. And so it's in your interests to always know what enemies are weak against, how to best exploit their weaknesses, etc. But the pace of the combat is what I really want to touch upon, because it's so incredibly satisfying to sweep through a dungeon. The game sets itself up so that you can absolutely just blast through these dungeons, and the rhythm of it and the pace of it is so fast and intense. So, you know, if you've not played a turn-based JRPG before, you probably would be forgiven for thinking, oh, they're quite slow games. And you can obviously take your time with it and plan out very carefully what you're going to be doing on each move, and in boss fights you will often have to do that. But when you're going through a dungeon and you're fighting just standard enemies, the way you move through it is so slick. I nearly said the other wrong S word. It's slick.
We've had cool and slick. Well done. I like this game.
It's slick as heck. And you have the option to scan. It's called Fey Sight. So you've got like a little fairy called Gallica who accompanies you throughout the game, and you can use her sight by holding down L2 to see how strong the enemies in that area are. So if an enemy has like a blue outline, you can walk up to it and hit it in real time with square. And if it's really weak and you're significantly stronger than this enemy, you will defeat it in real time without having to go into a turn-based battle. And I think it really revolutionizes that traditional JRPG grind when you're going into an area just to hoover up experience, currency, loot items. it makes it so quick and immediate. You can just go in there, slash everything without having to go into a battle. You can go into a battle if you want to. You press triangle to go into what Metaphor calls a squad battle, which is your traditional turn-based battle system. You can do that if you want, absolutely. But if you want to just sweep through, hit things with square and have them be defeated, you still pick up the experience, you still pick up the money.
Oh, I love that.
It's great, and it makes the whole grinding experience such a joy. I mean, I'm someone who enjoys going and grinding in a JRPG.
I love a grinding session.
I take immense satisfaction from arriving at a boss 4 or 5 levels higher than I need to be and absolutely wiping the floor with it. I just love it. I love it so much. But sometimes that grind can get repetitive. Not in Metaphor. It's really smooth. It's really slick. Really immediate. But also you can, in attacking enemies with square on the field, you can stun them as well. And then you get like a cool graphic pop-up saying squad battle. Do you want to go into the squad battle now? And you hit triangle, and there's a cool flash of anime cutscene. You get a little sparkle in the eyes of your protagonist.
Let's push through. We have the edge. This could be our chance.
This is our chance!
It looks amazing, Rosie. It just looks... The whole game looks like you're playing this really cool manga. Like, even when you're just exploring towns and dungeons in the world, there's like a quality to the visuals. It's almost like a hint of the wider world, and there's lots of little graphical pop-ups. It's constantly thinking about how it looks, how it's framing the action. The only game Persona is obviously one comparison, but it reminds me a lot of Vagrant Story in that way, and how every sort of shot is really carefully considered to look like almost like a panel in a comic book or a graphic novel, or in Metaphor's case, like a manga. It just looks unbelievably cool. And then you get the anime cutscenes. So really this game is like playing an anime. It's like really cool adult anime.
Yeah.
And a lot of the anime cutscenes are quite brutal. They're quite violent. I've already talked about how the characters rip their own hearts out when they transform into their archetypes.
I remember the first cutscene that introduces you to it. That's quite brutal, if memory serves me correct from the preview.
So like without giving away sort of like what happens later on in the game, the sort of like setup is the king has been assassinated by this horrible guy called Luis, and he's initially like the bad guy, and he does it in this really amazing cutscene at the beginning. You get a lot of, as you progress through the game, you'll get little hints as to the backstory of Luis and your protagonist, your unnamed protagonist. You can choose whatever name you like for him, and the heir to the throne, the prince, has been cursed by Luis separately. Everybody else thinks the prince is dead, but you are part of like a resistance group who in secret are trying to restore the prince to the throne, and part of that means trying to get rid of this curse. He's basically got these horrible magical thorns around him. He's in a coma. He can't wake up from it. Luis wants the throne. And that sort of forms the structure of the narrative going forward, is this big power battle for the throne. I won't spoil how that manifests in the actual game, because it is wild. Like when you get to the cutscene where it's like, okay, this is what this game's going to be about. This is going to be how... This is the thrust of the narrative, really. I would give you a million guesses as to what happens, Rosie.
Oh, I'm so excited, Rob.
You will not guess how it just plays out.
Oh my god, I want to see it. I can't wait to reach that point.
One has to ask, them dead, who shall take the throne?
The designs of the enemies and the designs of these cutscenes, and this is typical, I think, of Atlus, and in this case Studio Zero, which is a new studio formed from some former members of P Studio who made the Persona series. If you've played these games before, you will know and appreciate the sort of the unique design and the odd, unsettling design of not just the characters and the visual elements, but also the enemies as well. They're weird. They are referred to quite a lot, like the biggest aberrations, and like the bosses you fight. The characters refer to them as humans.
I remember this, yeah.
And they have like disturbing human elements to them. Like one boss you fight early on looks like this demonic bird with the face of just a man with glasses on. There's something really uncanny and unsettling and creepy about it in a really interesting way. And there's also like a slightly strange thing going on where the prince has given your character a book. And this is a book that is quite crucial, I think, to the plot of the game. And this book is a fantasy novel. but it seems to depict our world, this fantasy novel as we know it. So, and the theme of fantasy and imagination is quite prevalent. So when you start the game will ask you questions about what you think of fantasy. Is it limited to the imagination, or does it mean something more?
Very big questions.
Yeah, it's like, and I think it's a running theme that is explored throughout the game. But it's, I'm not going to spoil too much more about this, because I think it's really interesting to discover all of this for yourself. But the big change obviously is that we've gone from Persona, which is set in the real world.
Yes.
But it has fantastical elements, and your party sometimes they will jump into like a fantasy world at certain points, whereas Metaphor is set entirely in a fantasy world with hints of this other world existing in parallel. And it's very interesting when you look at the designs of the enemies, the fact that these horrible enemies are called humans, and some of the other enemies you fight these in the very first dungeon, like these teeth. You fight basically horrible demonic teeth. The design of them is crazy. Sometimes you're fighting just wolves and birds and butterflies and the typical stuff.
Yeah.
But other times you're fighting what look like bizarre, demonic, animated human body parts.
I've always loved that from Atlus, though. Like, they've always made the familiar just seem absolutely horrifying, but also in like a symbolic way.
Yeah. I think they enjoy this type of symbolism, these metaphors, if you like. And certainly it feels sometimes like you're playing a dream or a nightmare, but in the best way. And it's just, if you like Persona, you are going to like Metaphor. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
It's a very unique RPG. It's got a lot of systems that it needs to teach you, and so likewise with Persona, you could be playing the game for 10 hours, 20 hours and still feel like you're learning stuff. But when it sort of gradually starts to let go of your hand and you feel like you're getting a hold of all of these systems, the satisfaction of making them all work together and, as I say, breezing through these dungeons and slaughtering everything in it really quickly. And I've not talked about the menu, Rosie. The menu looks amazing, and I was expecting this because of how cool the menus in Persona look. And the menus in Metaphor have not disappointed.
It's more like a painting, isn't it? Rather than like the pop art style that Persona 5, let's just say specifically, has gone for. I remember from the preview event, Metaphor ReFantazio is more like a painting, if memory serves me correct.
Yes, I mean, the visual style is very unique, but just the elaborate, over-the-top, unnecessarily cool... I nearly said it. The way that you press the menu button and the menu's like, yeah, items, skills,
story,
equipment, whatever you want. Everything that you press, it's got an extra animation to it that just, everything has been thought of. Everything has been painstakingly tested and designed to just look like you're playing this amazing anime, manga, fantasy JRPG. It's ridiculously cool. I was intrigued by the idea of a fantasy Persona.
Yeah.
I didn't quite know what they were going to produce, and what they have is sort of what you would expect, really. It's everything you like about Persona, but in a fantasy setting, with extra stuff that is going to be really fun to discover.
You tease.
These are, new recruits. Just enlisted.
But, what I mainly like about it is going through the battles. You'll get bonus EXP if you manage to get through a battle without being touched by the enemy. And if you get a handle on the battle system, that is going to be most battles in most dungeons. You get an idea of what enemies are weak to, and you come back there to grind, and you will just breeze through. And just the way everything smoothly transitions into even the EXP screen at the end of a battle, the way it just flows on and then flows back out into the game again. The way when your character moves between one screen and another screen, there's this again. It could just fade to black and then fade up on the neck. It doesn't. There's a really cool little cutscene graphical clip of your character strolling through,
a silhouette,
an
isn't
idea, like a silhouette going through a graphical suggestion of the city or dungeon you're in. It just, the whole game is an immensely cool, slick experience. And as a fan of turn-based JRPGs, to have this sort of twist on that traditional formula it has just been incredibly satisfying. I am loving my time with it. I really am.
Well, from what you've been saying, it sounds absolutely amazing. And you guys should all be excited at home as well because, oh my god, I just want to wrap myself up in a blanket and play it right now. But Rob, thank you so much for telling us your thoughts on Metaphor ReFantazio. And thank you all so much at home for listening. If you do like the video, please feel free to give it a like. Subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this and hit the notification bell so that you always stay up to date with everything from the world of PlayStation. Thank you all so much for watching.
PlayStation